Hi guys, welcome to the channel. So as a part of this video, I'm going to make a video on IsEnabled and
IsDisplayed.
method that we have in Selenium. And this video is going to be on the playlist Selenium. So your web element has lot of predefined methods. Now, if you remember my previous videos on Selenium, which were find element and find elements, now those were also the predefined method that you have for your web element. Similarly, now for the same your web element, you have again two abstract methods, and those two abstract methods are IsEnabled.
IsDisplayed.
Now, how to work with this, way to use it in your project, I'm going to teach you in this video. So let's get started. Guys, if you remember my previous video of find element and find elements, I told you that for each and every type of method that you use in Selenium, now there will be some return type of that. Now, if you remember, I told you when I spoke about this video, find element video, I said you that the return type of find element is web element. And I also said you that the return type of your find elements is a list of web elements. Similarly, for your IsEnabled and
IsDisplayed.
the return type is a Boolean value, either true or false. Now, way to use it. What exactly is this IsEnabled and
IsDisplayed.
Now, let's say that you're working in some project, automation project you're working on, and now you want to make sure whether the element is really displaying it or not, whether the element is really displaying it on your web application or not. To confirm that, you use
IsDisplayed.
if it is giving you a true value, yes, you can go ahead and perform some action on it. If it is giving a false value, that means it is telling that there is no element. Now the element is not displayed. If you're getting the false value, that means it is telling that the element is not displayed. Simple. Similarly, now
IsDisplayed.
used to just confirm whether the element is really displayed on your web application or not. Now, one more thing is there that you guys must be knowing it whenever you try to launch any application. Now, if you are able to see that application, if you are able to see that particular component, if you are able to see, that means your
IsDisplayed.
is going to give you true value. Now, when it is giving you true value, now the element must be either enabled or your element must be either disabled. Now, what do you mean by enable element and disable element? So whenever your element is enabled, right, you can perform some action on it. Now, what type of action? Any kind of action. Maybe clicking on that, and maybe writing something using send keys method. Remember, my previous videos were all about that. So before going deep into that, if you are new to my channel or if you have not seen my previous videos on Selenium, I would request you guys to please go back to my playlist Selenium from starting and have a look to that from starting. That will give you more exposure of what I'm talking about. You can check out this playlist, that is Selenium. It already has 15 videos, so that will give you more clarity. So now if your application is really displaying on your web application, you have two things to do, whether to perform some action on it or whether to not to perform. You can perform action on some element if it is really displaying and if it is really enabled. So whenever your element is enabled, you can perform some action on it. Whenever your element is disabled, you cannot perform some action on it. To perform action on it or to not to perform action on it, the main criteria is that the element should be displayed. So if the element is displayed, you can have two options. Either your element will be enabled or disabled. I mean, just giving one example. Now, this is the HTML page that I have developed it using my own HTML knowledge or skill. Now, if you see here, now there are two components here, your first name and your last name. If you see here, on your first name text field, I'm able to write something because it is enabled, and it is enabled because it is displaying to me. And if you see your last name, I'm not able to click on it. If you can see that your last name component is like, it is not enabled, it is disabled. Now when some element is disabled, you cannot perform some action on it. So this is all about this video, that I'm going to show you practically how you can perform some action on it. Now, how to perform action on the enable element. Now, one final thing that I want to tell you before actually writing the program now is that you can perform action on the element once it is displaying. So once the element is displaying, you have two options now, either to perform some action. You can perform action now because your element is enabled, and you can perform action on this because the element is enabled. Now you cannot perform action on this. Both the element are displayed. Both the element are displayed. But both the elements are displaying, but this element is enabled, this element is disabled. If you remember, we are talking about two methods here, that is enabled and IsDisplayed. So both the elements are displayed now, right? You can see that from your eyes. But out of these two elements, whether this will return is enabled true or false, it will give true because you can perform, it is enabled, you can perform something on it. You are able to click on it, you are able to perform some action on it. Are you able to perform something on it? No, you are not. That's the reason it is disabled. So same thing I'm going to show you practically, like how when you actually use these two methods. Now there is a possibility that tomorrow when you are working in your own automation code that you're writing it, now there can be a possibility that somewhere you have to use these two methods, that is enabled and
IsDisplayed.
when to use it. You have to think by yourself, like where you can implement that in your program. Generally, whenever you're trying to perform some action on it, it's not that 100% of the places you will actually, whenever you're trying to click on some element, you will actually see whether the element is really displaying it or not. But there can be some scenarios like where before clicking on something, or before writing something on some particular element, you want to make sure that whether the element is really present on my web page or not. If the web page is present, I want to double make sure whether I can really perform some action on it or not. So you can really perform some action on it once it is enabled, and you cannot perform some action on it once it is disabled. So that's all I will be teaching you now practically. Now this was my theoretical. Now let's move to execute the same program. Now write a program which shows how IsEnabled and
IsDisplayed.
actually works. Now let's create a class to practically execute it. Now let's create a class. Give any name that you want to. Now let's say I'm giving IsEnable, is disable, anything that you would love to. Now you will try to launch your Chrome browser, right? So you already know how to launch your Chrome browser, which I have already taught in my multiple videos. So I'm not going to teach that again, but you know what I'm trying to do using these two lines, right? I'm hoping you guys know. If you guys have seen my other videos, I'm believing you guys know now how to launch your browser driver, right? So once I have done that, what I'm trying to do here is manish.get. I'm trying to launch something, some URL. And what is this URL? That URL is this URL, the HTML file which I have developed. Now let's try to inspect it. You can say that it is developed using name is equal to fname. I'm going to use the same name to inspect that particular element and try to write something on it probably. So, or maybe I will try to click on it. So for that, Manish dot find elements, or if I have to use the correct word, it is find element, and then find element by name. And you guys have seen the name, what it is, right? So the name is, I will try to see once again and try to copy paste the same name from which this particular component is made up of. So here I'm using my locator as by name, and the name is this. So you guys know this. Now you know this, right? If you have seen my find element video, that I told you that the return type of find element is your web element. So return type of your find element is your web element. Com1, I'm storing it in my com1. Now com1 is nothing but my component1. Now let's assume that. Now I will try to import my web element files. Now I have done that. Now you got to know that your f name, that is your component1, is the web element, because you are trying to find it using a find element method now, right? Now in future, what you can do is com1 dot is enabled. Before enabling, you must check whether it is displayed or not. So you will check whether it is really displayed or not. Now to do that, you can also write it like how I have written it. You can also write it as like, now if you remember my starting of the video, I said you that the return type of your isDisplayed is now your boolean value. I said you, if you remember. Now let's say that now this what I've written right now is displayed, just because if you remember at the I told you that is displayed and is enabled will give you some boolean value, maybe true or false. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm just checking, I'm inspecting this particular element, and the element is my this element, which is enable I can see, which is displayed that also I can see. So same thing, you're trying to inspect that, and after inspecting, you're just checking whether it is really displayed it or not, and you try to print the same thing. So the reason I'm trying to show you this, because I want you to understand whether if your element is really displayed, the output will be my true. The output will be your true. If I just execute it, if I just run this program, I can see that it will launch your URL, the URL which you have mentioned it, maybe in the new browser, not maybe, in fact, it will launch in the new browser, that is Chrome browser, and it will try to launch the URL that I have mentioned in my manish.get that URL, and in that it will try to inspect the one element which is made up of name tag. So you are just checking whether it is really displayed or not. You are checking whether it is really displayed it or not. So in reality, it has opened your Chrome browser, it has hitted your URL that you had mentioned it. If you see your output, right, you can see whether it has printed your true or false. So you got to know that it has printed true value. The reason, because your first element, that is your component first element, is really displayed. That's the purpose of your isDisplayed method. Now let's say that just for the same method, right, just check whether it is really enabled or not. So you will just check whether it is really enabled also or not. So how you can do this is using comp1 dot is enabled. So once you do that, I said you that the return type of your
Is enable.
is also a boolean value. Now component 2, C2 is your component 2, let's say. And let's say what you will do is you will just try to display the value of C2. So what you are trying to do here is you have inspected your same element, that is your F1, that is this one first name, and you are just checking whether it is really enabled or not. So you will just run this. Now, I wanted to observe your print system.out.println that you are trying to do. You are printing your C1 value and C2 value. C1 value will say whether it is displayed or not. C2 value will say whether it is really enabled or not. The reason I'm trying to run this program is because I want to see the value of is displayed and is enabled. I'm trying to show whether the first element, whether that F, your component number first, is really displayed or is really enabled or not. That one you can get to know by, as I told you, the return type of your is enabled and
Is displayed.
is a boolean value. If you can see your console, it will give you the output whether those two methods what they have returned. So you can see that both the methods have returned true value. That means my component number first is really displayed, your component number 2 is really enabled. But now what I'm trying to do here is I will copy each and everything, paste it here, but now I will try to do it for my component number 2. Now my component number 2 is this. If I try to inspect it, if I try to inspect this particular element, I can see that it is made up of name locator using lname, that is lname is nothing but your last name. So what I'm trying to do here is I will just change it using lname, and instead of your component 1 I will mark it as component 2, and when it is component 2 I will just mark each and everywhere component 2, and I am trying to store that value in my C3 and C4. So what I'm trying to do here is the component, now I'm trying to inspect this component now, the component which is displayed now, but it is not enabled. Why it is displayed? Because you are able to see with your eyes. Why it is disabled? You can see that you cannot perform anything on it, right? So same thing I have written here. I am trying to inspect it. After inspecting it, I am just checking with IsDisplayed method whether it is really displayed or not. I know it is going to return me true value. I know that. I'm just making you understand whether it is really true or false. And now I'm just checking whether it is really enabled or not. So you guys know why it is not enabled, because you are not allowed to perform something on it. So you will get the output as false. Same thing, I will just show it to you guys. Now, if you do this and run it, you can see that it will run your Chrome browser. It will launch your URL, that HTML URL that you have written it in your local system. And after it has launched the URL, you can go back to your console and just see the outputs. The first two output are for my component number 1. Now your component number 1 is nothing but the component which is now displayed and which is now enabled. Third true is for whether your component is really displayed or not. You know it is displayed. You have seen that. So it is displayed. Yes, it is true. Whether it is enabled or not. So it is not enabled. It is giving you the false value, because my IsEnabled will always give me Boolean value, either true or false. And just because I can see here my element is not enabled, it is actually disabled, it is not at all enabled. So I'm getting the value as false. But now let's say that you can always write a program whether if your if your component 2 is really displayed, and if your C2 is really enabled, then perform something. You can always do this. So in reality, you are going to write this kind of programs in future. Whenever you are trying to write it, you will usually write this kind of program. So what are you trying to do here is you are just making sure that if your element is really displayed, which element I'm talking about, the component number 2, which is now displayed but which is not enabled. So I am telling that if the element is really displayed, if the element is really enabled, then perform, then write you can perform on the element. You can perform on the element because your element is displayed and it is enabled. Else you are going to write you can't write, you can't perform action on component 2 just because it is not enabled. So I hope you guys have understood this, what I'm trying to do here. I'm just telling that if my component number 2 is really displayed, so you know that your component number 2 is really displayed. Yeah, it is displayed now. And I'm trying to write is that whether it is really enabled. If both of them are true, then write this, then do this. What it is trying to do, you can perform action on the element. Else you cannot perform action on the component 2 just because it is not enabled. Your component number 2 is nothing but which is displayed, but it is not enabled. So what you will do is you will run this program. And now you can see your console, like what kind of output you're getting. So remember, I am trying to check on my component number 2, which is my displayed, but it is not enabled. I know that, but I'm writing a program for you guys. Now, similar kind of programs, you have to implement it in your own organization whenever you're joining it, based on the project that you're working on. Here, I'm just trying to show you guys practically by taking any application. Now you can see that it is written true because your component number first is displayed. You're getting true again because it is telling that your component number 2 is enabled. You're getting again true here because it is telling that your component number 1 is enabled. You're getting true again because it is telling that your component number 2 is displayed. You're getting false because it is telling that your component number 2 is not enabled. You're getting this output now. You can't perform action on component 2 just because it is not enabled. It has got the else part, not the if part. Why? Because it is actually displayed, but it is not enabled. The criteria is not satisfied, and just because the criteria is not satisfied, it will not execute this. It will execute the else part. If you guys are not getting how I have written this if and else statement, I uploaded this video long back on my channel, which people have not seen much. I would request you guys to have a look to that video and please come to this video just to understand how I have written this if and else statement if you want to know. So that's all from this video. I hope this video was useful. In case yes, please give a big thumbs up to this video. Subscribe to my channel, Software Testing by MKT, and please share this video with any friends. See you guys soon in the next video. Take care.